Hey guys, what's going on? This is Atharva here, and this video will mark the start of a new series on this channel, which is going to be called as Read with Atharva. So in this series, we are going to pick the top intermediate and advanced level articles, which I get through newsletter and stuff, and we are going to read through them, and I'm going to try my best to explain the most important parts of these articles. So what will this exactly achieve? Firstly, this will get some support to the creator itself. So whoever wrote the article will get promoted through my videos. Not that much is that big, but anyways, and I hope that you will also learn something new because I see a lot of people reading technical articles, and I think this should develop some kind of habit for you to read technical articles as well. So yeah, I think this should do the job. So let's get to the first article of this series. So in the first video of this series, we will look at an article called as A Better Guide to Forms in React, which is written by Andrew Jones on dev.to. I will leave the link in the description below if you want to read the entire article or if you want to leave some comments or support this author. So let's start. It says the React ecosystem is lush with libraries, articles, videos, and more resources for every web development topic you could imagine. However, over time, many of these resources become outdated with modern best practices. Working on a complex dynamic form recently for an AI side project and researching good guides to React form, I realized that most of the resources about building forms are outdated, often by many years. And yeah, I know, because a lot of tutorials still use class-based components, and it just tells that none of these are like up to date with the latest standards, and which sucks. And I'm very pretty sure that this guide is showing all the latest practices, and yeah, excited to dive in. So this article will explain the modern best practices for building forms in React, how to build dynamic forms, how forms relate to React server components, and more. Finally, after gaining an understanding on these topics, I'll conclude with an explanation of what I've found lacking in other guides, recommendation from my experience with React. Now, there are two types of forms you can use in React. First is an controlled form, and the second is an uncontrolled form. So the author has done a very good job of explaining what both are, and we are going to look at these. The key to understanding React form is the idea of controlled versus uncontrolled inputs, which are two different methods of building forms in React. And my bad, controlled and uncontrolled should not be forms, they should be inputs. That makes a lot of sense because in the form you can have both controlled and uncontrolled inputs. So let's see what a controlled input is. He has used control forms, so yeah, I think I wasn't that wrong. So control forms store each input value in React state, and then control forms store each input's value in React state and then set the value of each input on each re-render from that state. So like whenever you type something in an input field, it will store every single thing that you typed, basically the latest value of the text box in a React state. So if another function updates the state, that will immediately be reflected in the component's values. If your React logic does not render the form inputs, the values will still be maintained in the app state. So what's happening here is that we are using a text box and we are giving the control to React to handle it. So what are the advantages here? What you can do? Controlled inputs tend to give you more options in React logic, such as complex non-HTML standard form validation as the user types, maybe checking the password strength, code manipulation of the values of the inputs, such as hyphenating phone numbers as the user types, and there are a lot more different use cases of this. So why would you need a control input? So let me try to break this down in very simple terms. Basically, in the cases where you want to monitor every single type, every single button click of a user on an input field, that's where you should use controlled inputs, because what happens is that the state changes and you can detect that state change and you can perform specific actions and you can monitor what the user typed in real time before the user even submits the form. And as the author said, it can be used in like something like password strength checking, and it's very handy. Like if you go on a website and try to enter a new password, it will tell you that the password is weak or the password is strong. How is it done? It's done by using controlled inputs. So they look something like this. So I want to zoom in and I want to show you how these exactly work. So yeah, so this is the code. What's happening here is we have use state here. We have imported use state. what we are doing is we have an input field here. Note that we don't have any form tags, we directly have an input field which has a type of text, which has a value of value. That's from the state we just created. So we are using value and set value. And what we are doing is we are setting the value of the text box. That means the thing that will appear on the text box as you type is the value. And what we are doing is we are taking the control and we are changing how things work when somebody changes the value of the text box while typing. So if you type a button, so if you type a letter into an input field, into a control input field, this function right here will get executed. On change will get executed, and this will execute the handle change function, which is this one. So what is this doing? It's taking an event which is like it contains the value of like everything related to the input field. So what you can do is you can do the set value. So you are setting the value of the state here, and you can say event.target.value, so which contains the actual input of the actual value of the input field. So you already have a value here, right? So like I could go ahead and set this use state to an actual, hold on. So you can use state, and you can say ABC. So what happens, like when you open this page, ABC will be pre-filled in the form, and whenever you type D after this, this function will play, and what it will do, it will take the content which you have typed and it will store it in the state, and yeah, then the value will again put it here. Well, the value is not really necessary here, but you don't need to have it here. But if you want like more granular control over what appears in your text box, you can always have that. There's no harm. So yeah, this is how controlled inputs work in very simple terms. I know this might be like a lot of different complexities, but I think this is very important. Like we are reading an intermediate to advanced. I think this I should call this an intermediate article. I think you should know how forms, controlled and uncontrolled forms work in React. So like just I mentioned before, this doesn't use a form tag. So note that it would be more semantically correct to wrap the input in a form and give the input a name, just like we do in forms. Like if you see websites created using PHP, that's how it does it. You have an action which links to another PHP page, and you have a form method or form action, and you have input fields which have a name property which can then be accessed on the server side. But you don't need to do that here because it's not functionally needed, because the data is already saved in a state. So when you already have the data saved in a state, you do not need to have a form tag, and you do not need to check the form after it's submitted. So we do not need a real on submit event, and our input does not need to be accessed directly when the button is pressed. So sounds fun and good, right? But there are downsides, and boy, there are a lot. Like people talk about this very often. So the first downside is you may not want to render the form every time the user types. So what happens in React? So like when your state changes, the component gets re-rendered, and this might cause some serious performance issues in bigger components. Like if you have a big form, that will cause a lot of things to re-render, and I think it will cause a big performance issue on your application. And you need to write a lot of code to manage complex forms, because you wind up with a lot of states as your forms grow in size. That lead to boilerplate use state and state settings, which expands your code. Okay, so I want to show you why this is the case. So look at this form. We only had one input here, right? Which is input type text, value, which pulls it in from the state. So imagine if you had 5 text box here. So what we would do, we would create another state for each text box. So you will have like 5 states just like these. So probably value 1, set value 1, so on to like value 4, and you have like 5 text boxes here. Okay, 5 is still fine, but like what if you had like 20? You have to create 20. You have to create 20 states here, 20 input fields. There's one alternative that you could use one single state. You could use an object there, and you can like have all of those text boxes. Like you can have value 1. Hold on, I'll show you. So you could have something like value 1, ABC, then you can have value 2, ABCD, and so on till like 20 or whatever you want, and this can be your entire state. And what you can do is for each value you can simply say value dot val1, and for handle change you need to of course you need to do a lot of different mutation stuff, which is like always a pain, but that's how it will work. But there is another downside here. It's harder to build dynamic forms. So hold on. It's harder to build dynamic forms where the number of fields is variable. So like if you have a form where the number of fields is variable, if you don't understand that, I will show you with an example. Not like a working example, but I want to show you with a drawing. So imagine that, imagine that you have a form. Please spare my drawing skills. We are not doing a drawing class right here. So imagine you have a section called names, and then you have a plus button. This is going to be a submit button right here, and you already have one input field here. The placeholder for this is going to be name1. So what if you have a list of names you want to add? There's no specific limit, so like you don't have to add only 5 names. It can be anything. It can be 20, it can be 25. The user will decide. The user of the application will decide. So what they will do, they will just click the plus button, and there should be another text field in front of their eyes with placeholder of name2. So how would you achieve this in a controlled form environment? You cannot like dynamically create states. It's going to be very messy. What you can do is, like just I mentioned before, you can use the object method, and you can basically have an array instead. You can create an array, you can have an object inside that, or you can simply have an array of strings, and you can do that, and it's going to be a lot messier, and it is going to suffer with the same problems which I told. Like if you update one input field, it will re-render all of those input fields, and it's going to be an absolute mess. So it says the only way around this memoization adds a lot of more boilerplate. So I want to make a note on this, because there is one React compiler called as React Forget from the core React team, which is coming out, I don't know when, but it's been announced and it's being used in Instagram production all over the place. So what it does, I don't know about the lot of details. I will probably create a video after I have done enough research, but what it does is that you do not ever need to do memoization. It will handle everything under the hood, and that sounds pretty cool, but it's not open source yet, so we do not have access to the compiler. But as soon as we have, I'm going to create a video about it. Yo, look, there already is an example. I just provided one in like a drawing state, but this is an actual code. So like you have a cumbersome form component, and you have one state, and you have it's an object with all of these properties, and then there is one comment which says potentially many more individual properties. So it's about to show like if you have like 50 input fields, so you will have 50 different properties here, and then you have one handle change function which will handle the actual changing of this object. So what we would do is you would create your input fields manually, and then you would have this boilerplate which is value and on change function for every single input field. Yeah, you can generate it, but I think it's not a good way for writing code. And let me tell you, if the only purpose you are using like controlled form is to like just get the data from the user and submit it once a person clicks on a button, you should probably not be using controlled input. You should be probably using uncontrolled input, but yeah, which we will look in a bit, but this is definitely not the way. So yeah, and now let's see. On the other hand, uncontrolled inputs do not save the input values in React state. Instead, uncontrolled forms use the native built-in form functionalities of vanilla HTML and JavaScript to manage data. So if you are old enough for the PHP days, let me tell you what used to happen. So you would have a form, you would have an action to a PHP page. So whenever you click submit form, it used to, which used to be button type submit, it used to actually submit the form to the PHP page, and it used to be able to access all the elements. So how was it able to do that? Because each input field used to have a name property which was accessible for the server, and you can even use it in the client to access all the data, which it's been done in this article. But that's how forms without using JavaScript used to work back in the day. nowadays you won't see a lot of forms that don't use JavaScript in the modern website world, but I think we are going back. We are also using JavaScript, but we are trying to make sure that we are not compromising performance, and we are using uncontrolled inputs where there is no need of like updating in real time. So yeah, so for example, instead of setting a state with the inputs value every time it's changed and then change its setting its value prop, the browser manages the input value. Our React component never needs or uses this value. When the component is rendered, React will add the onSubmit event listener to the form, and when the form submit button is pushed, our handle submit function runs. Instead of using React state, it's much closer in a way a plain HTML form would work without any JavaScript. That's what I mentioned, like that's a more traditional way of using forms. So there's an uncontrolled form here. So what's happening here, you have a form tag. So you do have a form tag here because you are not relying here on React states to handle and save the data of your forms. So you have a form on submit, which is a handle submit. We are just passing the handle submit function here. Typically in traditional forms, what you would do, you would have an action and it would do the submitting for you, but you are taking things own hands here by providing the function that will be executed when you click the submit button. So the handle submit function will be executed after you click submit button here, and we will get to it in just 1 second. So we have an input field with a type of text, and the name is input name. The name is very important here, which can be accessed. This name will be used to access the data of this input field later. And then we have a button type submit, and we have send. So why do we have the type submit? It tells HTML that this is the button which will be used to submit the form. So like if you had a button type button, or like if you literally didn't have any type, it was going to be a custom button and you had to define what it does. So yeah, now what happens, like whenever you submit a form, the handle submit function is executed. It gets an event which contains everything about the form which was submitted. The first thing we are going to do is event.prevent default. What this will do is it will prevent any reload of the page. By default it will redirect to the action, but we are going to override this behavior by saying event.prevent default, so it will not reload the page. Then we are using const form data is equal to new form data, and we are passing in event.target here so that we can access all the data of the form here. So now this will return us a map which we can access it like this. So for input value, which was we are going to create a new variable called as input value, and we are going to do form data dot get input name. So where is this input name coming from? Yes, it's coming from the name attribute here. Now we get the value of the text box. So like whatever the user inputted in this text box is going into input value, and then you can do whatever you want to do with it. So they're just like sending it to an API, like whatever you want to do, it's your wish. So yeah, a benefit of this approach is that there's a less boilerplate. So compare these two inputs. So this one is a controlled input. So you simply have you have a state, you have a handle change function, then you have input type text, and you need to pass these two annoying things, which is value and on change. In uncontrolled inputs, you do not need to do anything. You just trust HTML and let it do its thing. The difference is significant even with one input, but becomes even more clear with many more inputs. Compare the longer control form above with this one. So where is the longer control form? This one. So it had like an object, and you need to have a lot of boilerplate here. And let's compare this to this. You have a simple HTML form. We are passing in a handle submit function here, and we have all of these input fields. You do not need to pass any value or on change. What's happening here, we are doing an event.prevent default, and then we are creating a new form data, and there's a way to loop through the map. So you can simply use this loop to simply console logging all the entries inside of the map. So yeah, this is a way cleaner of doing things, but the thing here is that your input fields are no longer under the control of React anymore. If you want to have like validations, you can max to max have an HTML validation. So for like input fields, you can have minimum and maximum values. And so if you want to have an email, you cannot do regex. So what you have to do is you have to use input type email, which will use the browser's native email format checker. And you are relying on the browser a lot here. You are not using your own validation logic here, but if you wanted to do that, you would need to use a controlled input. So yeah, and that validation only, like if you are like want to show the validation in real time, that's when you want to do it. Like if you have like imagine that if minimum was not an HTML validation, what you would do is like check the state every time the input is changed in a control form, and check if the characters length is more than 20. Then what you would do is you will limit it to 20, and whatever entered next will not be considered. And that's how you would do it in a controlled input, but you don't need to do it because HTML already supports that. This form has less boilerplate than the control version. The downside of downside of uncontrolled forms is that you don't have direct access to each input's value. This can make custom validation more difficult and makes direct input value manipulation impossible, just like I said. Caveats and compromises. Now, don't use ref. Now, I was a little surprised. Like a lot of tutorial online suggest that you should use ref for uncontrolled form, and mostly I just didn't use ref because I found it like it's still very boilerplatey. But it says for uncontrolled form, don't use ref. So like I was a little curious, like what should we use? It says many articles recommending using a ref on each input in uncontrolled form instead of using the new form data, which I believe is because the form data API is lesser known, which I pretty much agree, and not a lot of people know it. However, it's been a standard for almost a decade and has been supported by all the major browsers for many years. I strongly recommend that you do not use an useref call for each form input, as it introduces some of the same challenges and boilerplates as useState calls. However, there are some use cases where ref can help. So for focus management, programmatically focus on form elements, especially when dealing with dynamic form fields. So like if you want to interact with the form field, like the specific component, you can do all of that. So you can like I'm just going to go with like one example here. So this is not a video this on useref. So what you can do is you can simply define an input empty ref. So input ref is equal to useref and just pass in null. Just pass in that ref to an input field. So here just pass in it to an input field, and like whenever you click a focus input button, you execute this function, which will do input ref.current.focus, and this focus is actually a function for the input field, which will actually focus the input field, which means that whenever you click the button, the user will be prompted to type in that input field. This is just a one example. We don't want to look at most of them, but one thing I want to point out real quick, not about anything, it's completely unrelated. Forward ref is going away soon with React. I believe React 19 or 20, I don't know what the latest is going to be. I'm sorry, I should be knowing all of that, but yeah, forward ref is going away, and you can pass in ref as a prop. I want to create a video on the latest features which are going to be coming pretty soon. Now this is the most ideal case if you are just using client-side React. Mixing controlled and uncontrolled. In many cases, you may need to control one or a few inputs. Manipulating a phone number as the user types it in is great example. In those cases, even if you are using an uncontrolled form, you can use one controlled input. In that case, don't use the state to access the input's value in the form submission. Continue using the form data just use the state to manage the display of the input in question. So like we have a mixed form here. So let's see what's happening. You have a format phone number function which uses regex to like the format the phone number itself, and we have a form which looks like an uncontrolled. First we have a name which is an uncontrolled input, email which is an uncontrolled input, but the phone number itself is not uncontrolled input, it's an controlled input. So what we are doing is we are storing the values in the state, which is here. Hold on. Const phone number is equal const phone number set phone number is equal to use state, which is going to be an empty state. So whenever somebody edits the phone number, this function will be executed, handle phone number change, and we are formatting the number and we are setting it to the state. So why are we using an control field here? Let's look at it again, because what we want is like every time the user types in number, we want to format the number and then set it to the state. You cannot do that in real time when the user is typing with an uncontrolled input. So the best way is using uncontrolled input, and where it's necessary and where it's not, like it's in the name, email, you do not need, and even in address, you do not need uncontrolled input. Like you do not need to access while the user is filling out the details. So you can leave these as uncontrolled inputs and only use the one which is necessary as a controlled one. And that's the best case scenario. And yeah, note minimize states. In this example, you wouldn't want a state for storing the raw phone number and separate state for saving the formatted phone number with an effect switching them. That would cause unnecessary re-renders. Yeah, now this is also very cool. Speaking of optimizing re-renders, we can also move the controlled input to its own component to minimize re-renders of the rest of the form. So yeah, you just isolate the input field here, and like here, phone input, just isolate it here and just include it here in the phone input component, and yeah, it will simply work. And it will like if you change something in here, only this component specifically will re-render and not the parent one. So yeah, now there is one important thing here, like you have the state here, right? How does your parent know what value you have inputted in this input? The answer is very interesting, which is here. I know most of you intermediate and advanced developers already know this, but I want to focus on people who don't know and want to understand this article. It says, remember that when the React code is rendered as HTML, the browser will only see HTML for the form and the inputs inside, including the input that phone input renderers. So the HTML doesn't care about your component structure. Since you have used an form here, which is supposed to be an uncontrolled input for like an uncontrolled form, so like you have uncontrolled input in it. So what it's doing is that it can still access the value for this input, which is still nested inside this form because we have this component here. So the end HTML would be that this input will be a part of this form right here. So you will always have the value regardless. So you do not need to like have like callbacks and stuff to just get the value of the state out of the component, which will basically defeat the entire purpose. So you do not need to do it. So yeah, but wait, how do I validate input values in uncontrolled inputs? So we know that we can validate inputs in real time in controlled inputs, and for uncontrolled inputs, maybe it's pretty much clear that if you don't want real-time validation, you can simply use uncontrolled inputs, which can still do validation but not real-time. It's like after you submit the form, you can do the validation. And I think since I was talking all of this, it should have been perfectly clear. But if not, let's still dive into it. If you thought of this, you are not alone. When validation is required before submitting the form, React devs jump to use controlled components for state. So yeah, let's directly look at the code. So we have an uncontrolled form here, again with an handle submit function. Then we have input fields here which use the validation. Initial validation is like the HTML validation, and then we have like the errors object. Errors is going to be a state pretty much. Yeah, it's going to be an empty object initially. So like if you have any errors, so like if there is an errors.name, then you will print out the error here. Similarly for email and phone number. So what's happening in handle submit? First of all, event.prevent default, which is of course what you do. And then you have form data here. And then what we are going to do is we are introducing a new variable, validation errors, and we are setting it to an empty object. For email, we are getting the email, and then we are performing the validations, like whatever you want to do. Here it's checking if it's from example.com. So like if it's checking if the domain matches with what they are expecting. Then we are setting validation errors dot email is equal to the actual thing, error text, and same for phone numbers and stuff. And yeah, so it's checking that if the validation errors length is more than 0, then we are setting it to the state. So if you want to map through an object, you can use object.keys. So there's also an example for React server components. So RSC has a big impact on the way we write forms, because for the first time, if our forms inputs do not use state, they can be rendered on the HTML on the server and ship 0 JavaScript to the browser. That means that uncontrolled forms can be interactive without JavaScript, making them function earlier rather than writing for JS to download and execute, waiting for JS to download and execute. In effect, it makes your website feel snappier. There's no delay to interactivity. it says using Next.js, you can also use server actions in all of your forms. You don't need to write an API or for your form to interact with. All you need is the handler function. And yeah, if you build a mixed form with control inputs in an RSC rendered form, make sure to encapsulate your control inputs into a separate client component. So if you don't know about React Server components, if you want me to make a video on React Server components, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll make that. But what happens in React Server components is that you have two types of components. One is a client component and one is a server component. Client component is the regular old component, like which runs on the client side, the JS is downloaded and stuff. Server components, what happens is that the server renders it and it sends the HTML back with minimal JavaScript. If you are not using any kind of weird stuff, it will send absolutely no JavaScript. And yeah, so what we are doing here, this is a page.jsx file. This file does not have a use client directive on the top. That means that this is a server component, and we have a simple uncontrolled thing here, and then we have a server action, which is a use server. If you don't know what server actions are, I have created a video on Next.js server action. But use server means that this function will run on the server. So you can simply pass in the action. You do not even need to take control back using the handle submit. So this uses even less JavaScript here. So you can simply use action and we can pass in a function which will run this function on the server side. The create function will run on the server side as a server action. So you can do any type of validation here as well. And in the client component, you can simply have that normal controlled input here. So yeah, you can simply have the name and it will still get to the server, just like we mentioned before. Form libraries, I have made a couple of videos on form libraries as well. There are many great form libraries in React ecosystem designed for controlled inputs. Recently I have been using React Hook Form, which I already have a video on. For those applications, though, I have been leaning more heavily on uncontrolled inputs, so I don't need a library to manage the form state. Edit. Some popular options are React Hook Form, Formic, and Informed. I have made a video on React Hook Form and Formic. I haven't yet made one on Informed, I never knew about Informed, to be completely honest. So I will do a research and I will make a video on that. So yeah, conclusions. This article was motivated by confusing, outdated, or misleading articles that show up near the top of Google search result for React forms. We will take a look, but let's see what the author has observed. One of the articles says the more idiomatic React way would be using control forms. I don't think either controlled forms or uncontrolled inputs are more React idiomatic. In reality, both types have their place, as discussed above. So in fact, many older articles seem to recommend controlled inputs. I would argue that uncontrolled inputs is actually more web idiomatic by nature of relying on less JavaScript, which allows uncontrolled inputs to shine in React Server components. Yeah, like the user does not care if it's React idiomatic or not. Like if your performance sucks, your website sucks. Like just do something about it. Then not one of the top articles uses form data. For uncontrolled forms, at least two recommend using multiple useref calls, making your code inflexible and more boilerplatey. Some of the top articles still use class components with no mention of function components. So yeah, let's try to search for React forms. So I'm going to open a new tab. I'm on an iPad today, so let's use the keyboard. React forms. Alright, so let's look at the legacy. The first link is the legacy React documentation. Okay, anyways, let's just open it. It says the docs docs are old and stuff, but here you'll see they are using class components. But yeah, I think these are links. So if you go here, I mean, this certainly does not help, but yeah, let's go back. Let's see React forms from W3 schools. This one is interesting, but it's using a controlled form, which we already know. Let's go back. Let's actually search for uncontrolled forms. Now hold on. Newline.co. Let's see. Oops, my keyboard must go down. All right, they are using class-based components. So yeah, I mean, no hate to those websites. They probably wrote it a long time ago and forgot about that, and it's completely fine. But it's absurd that not a lot of creators have created content about this. And I'm a technical writer myself, and when I think about it when I think about ideas to write content on. This definitely comes through my mind, but I think that somebody might already have created content on it, thinking that it's a very easy topic to write on. So I just mostly skip it. But it turns out that's not really the case. However easy it seems to you, you should always research if articles are up to date about it or not. And I think that's one tip for all of the content creators out there. But yeah, for the developers, we saw what the article has to offer. So yeah, if you like this video, make sure you click the like button, hit the subscribe button. Please remember to click the bell notifications on so that you get notified every time I post a new video. And share this video with your friends so that they enjoy the same level of knowledge that you are enjoying right now. If you have any types of article you want me to look on, there are socials in my description. I'm pretty sure you cannot leave comments in the YouTube comment section, because even if you post it, they won't be visible to anyone. So please go to my socials and DM me the links of articles you want me to cover. And I'm hoping to upload more on this channel in the coming next weeks, and I hope to cover a lot more articles. Yeah, I would really appreciate if you share some, but expect 2 videos a week about Read with Atharva on this channel. I'm not promising you that. You could get even 1 or even 0 in some cases, but this is the initial idea what I'm thinking about. So if this series works out, I will be posting more. If it doesn't, I'll be posting less. So yeah, if you have any suggestions, make sure you leave them in the comments below. And yeah, that's it for this video, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.